I'm back. Mr. Clarke's back. Time to take a look at 10.2 as the Renaissance spreads into Northern Europe. Some of the lesson objectives here, we'll see some of the major themes of Northern European artists and humanists and writers. We'll explain how the printing press shaped European society. Okay. All right, so number one, why was the Renaissance able to spread to areas of Flanders, in northern France and Belgium during the 1400s and 1500s? Okay, Flanders had a very strong economy, was the center of trade. They had wealthy individuals there who could support the arts. Keep in mind, each time we go through a question there, you're kind of reading the question, thinking about the response even before I take you through. Number two, what were some of the characteristics of Northern European Renaissance paintings? Artists developed new techniques for using oil paints. They portrayed more realistic scenes with more vibrant colors. The work included scenes of ordinary people and their daily lives. Number three, in what ways did Albert Durer's engravings reflect his own time period and culture, including his travel to another country? And we have an engraving there as an example for you. Okay, after visiting Italy, he brought the ideas of the Italian Renaissance to Germany. His engraving technique allowed for him to make prints of his art and other work. So that's the key thing about an engraving is you basically are able to more easily mass produce it so that the imagery can spread to other places. Why was Albert Dürer such an important figure during the Renaissance? He was one of the greatest German artists. He was a scientist and inventor, and he brought many Renaissance ideas to Northern Europe. So this allowed for things to spread quite a bit more easily. Number five, what did Northern European humanist scholars emphasize in their work? They emphasized education, classical learning, and religion. Okay, as we look at number six, and I did a accidentally pre-scroll. It had Thucydidus Erasmus training as a priest sharpened his critique of the church. Well, anybody who uh, basically worked for the church had a more inside knowledge of what the inner workings of the church were. And he had experience working with the church and believed everyone should have the ability to read the Bible. And for a long period of time, the church was hesitant to allow for the Bible to be translated into different languages. They wanted to kind of have a monopoly on the interpretation. So Erasmus is one of the first and early people here during this period of time in history to call for some church reforms. And this was not very well received, of course, by the church. They weren't one to be receptive to criticism. And you can see Erasmus there, living from 1466 to 1536. How did Erasmus impact religion in Europe in the late 1400s? He took it upon himself to translate the Bible into different languages so more people could read and understand on their own. He was a huge advocate for people to have their own interpretations. He looked to educate people on religious doctrine or teachings, and he looked to reform the Catholic Church all of which was not, as again, very well received. Okay, next, we're going to look at Sir Thomas More. Number 8, explain the ideas of English writer Sir Thomas More, which were expressed in his book Utopia. So you can see the book Utopia here, and you can see the buildings and such that are advocated in the imagery there on the book. So when you think about Utopia, he wanted to create a utopian society, which would be an ideal or perfect society. People would be equal, peace and harmony for all. You wanted to educate society. You wanted these educated people to have and live without any crime within society. And the word utopia, it literally means nowhere. So when you think about a perfect society on Earth today, utopian society, it does not exist, which makes utopia kind of the appropriate term for a perfect society or ideal society. 9, what form of government would be most closely associated with a utopian society? Communism, which has the goal of creating a classless society, and theoretically everyone would be equal. And again, when you think about communism, it's not really ever worked out in practice as it's written down in theory. So that's why I put theoretically everyone would be equal. Okay, looking at number 10, why is William Shakespeare considered one of the greatest Renaissance writers of all time? Of course, Shakespeare is somebody I'm sure everybody's familiar with. 1564 to 1616 would be the years in which he lived. Of course, he lived a very brief life in comparison to average life expectancy today. But back then it was around that in your 50s. 10, why is Shakespeare considered one of the greatest writers? Well, he wrote many plays and poems that express realistic settings. The idea that you're required to read this within your language arts classes still to this day. He was able to write it in a fashion that people could understand, so it was something that was very much embraced during that period of time. When you think about the themes explored in Shakespeare's works, and this should be something obviously based on your own experiences in language arts, you probably can figure out some of the things that were emphasized. The complexity of individuals. He emphasized the importance of the classics. And for number 12, you could put down your own list of examples that you like best. In fact, take a moment to put down your top 3 for Shakespeare. And these are opinions. You don't have to change it to any of the examples I put down myself. A Midsummer Night's Dream, Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth are amongst the ones that he's famous for. You can see there some of the different works in the imagery on the left, as well as a kind of a book shelf of his top works on the right, and then Macbeth in the center. Next, we'll look at the printing press. 13, why do you think so few people could read and write during the Middle Ages and early Renaissance? Very little time to learn. Many people were working in the fields and the farms all day long. They were also focused just simply on surviving, and they focused in on religion, and people couldn't afford books since they were very expensive. All of that contributed to a much lower literacy rate than what we have in society today. Obviously, today with required school in most countries around the world and more money available, it's allowed for the literacy rate to increase. And when you think about during this period of time prior to the invention of the printing press, how were books reproduced prior to the printing press? Just logically, as you might think, they were handwritten. And because they were handwritten, obviously it took a very long period of time to reproduce one book, and therefore very expensive. The Bible was the only widely available book at the time. Images there are some older Bibles. 15, how did Johann Gutenberg's printing press revolutionize the world? Well, think about if you could mass produce books on a printing press, what that impact might be. The key things is books are being produced more rapidly. They became less expensive or more affordable. Literacy rates went up. People became better educated. Education led to people challenging governments and religion. There's an image of the printing press. The printing revolution brought immense changes to Northern Europe. Do you find this to be true or not? Cite some evidence to support your opinion. So I'll give you a moment to reflect out for the lesson reflection, as well as if you need anything from the final question. Number 15 above there, those responses are there. Question 15 is kind of an important question, so make sure you get the responses down for that one. Okay, we assume most people put down yes, that the printing press increased the availability of books, knowledge, and access to information, and ideas, of course, would spread much more rapidly. So just make sure you responded out to all the questions. Hopefully you enjoyed our discussion here of the spread of the Renaissance into Northern Europe. And until next time, Mr. Clarke is out.